Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, June 7th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about fundraising numbers in the United States Senate and in the United States House of Representatives and what this means for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, on your screen right now, you're looking at an article that discusses the Democratic Party and Republican Party committee total fundraisings, saying that it's about even. Once you reach the end of the article, you will realize that the Democratic Party has been narrowly outperforming Republicans in terms of overall fundraising. And I find this to be quite interesting because when you go down to different committees, you'll see that the GOP tends to do a little bit better, and then the Democratic Party tends to do a little bit better in other committees. For example, if you're looking at the congressional campaign committees for both sides, you'll notice the Democrats have out-fundraised Republicans. But on the opposite side, in the United States Senate, Republicans have outperformed Democrats in terms of fundraising altogether. Now, these are incremental changes. You're looking at the NRSC raising 2% more than the Democrats, and then the DCCC raising 1% more than the Republicans in the House. So it isn't anything super significant, but it is worth pointing out because I want to compare it to how it was just a year ago in the 2020 election cycle. Now, if you're looking at the total amounts fundraised in the election cycles of 2020, you have to also break it down by Senate and House because the Democrats take the lead in the House, but not necessarily in the Senate. In the Senate, the Democratic Party, the DSCC, which is different than the individual campaigns, but the DSCC raised $300 million during the 2020 election cycle. $303 million. They spent $300 million of it. Now, the Republican version of this committee, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, raised $338 million and spent $331 million. So they raised about $30 million more than the Democratic Party. And, that's something that isn't as incremental as just maybe 1%, but it isn't enough to dramatically change the outcome of the national results. This was, funding that was raised as a result of a lot of the polarization and the heightened importance of the 2020 election cycle for whoever was going to become president in November of 2020. I mean, looking at how much money was raised on both sides, not only in the Senate, but also in the House, really shows you just how important and crucial this election was. Because if you do a flashback to 2016, you'll notice that the amount of money raised wasn't nearly as much as it was in 2020. Even in 2018, which was a very, heightened year because it was the first year in which President Trump was in office, you were looking at the first midterm election for President Trump and only midterm election. The Republican Party only raised $151 million. Now, the same is true for the Democrats. If you go back to 2016, not 2014, let's go to 2016, you'll notice the Democrats only raised $179 million. 2018, which is a very good year for Democrats, only $148 million. So 2020 was a year like no other, and the same can be applied to the House of Representatives. But one thing I do want you to take away from the Senate results is essentially that Republicans did better in the Senate. And we'll see what happens in the House because the opposite is true. On the Democratic side, we will see here that the Democrats raised $296 million. This is the 2018, 340, I don't know why I went back, $345 million in the 2020 election cycle. If you go to 2020, let's see if we can actually get here, you'll see that there was only $280 million raised on the Republican side. Now, that's a little bit different than if you're looking at the Senate results and seeing 338 versus 300. Looking at the amount 345 versus 280, that's when you start to see it expand a little bit. But both ways, I'm not going to say there was a super significant difference in the amount of money raised. Both parties raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was applied and utilized in many ways effectively and not so effectively. That's just part of campaigning during the 2020 election cycle. Now, we can do a little bit of a flashback to what happened in 2020. In the House of Representatives, Democrats were able to retain their majority, but lost a number of seats. The Republicans had a net gain of 12 seats in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, we saw the Democrats have a net gain of 3 seats. So it is quite interesting that Democrats raised less money in the Senate, but more money in the House, but they lost seats in the House, but gained seats in the Senate. Just a quite interesting observation. It's something that I personally was not expecting. But again, American politics is very, very strange. And now we are starting to see articles released and press releases being made about how the Republican Party and the Democratic Party seem to be fundraising about equal. or one party seems to be doing better than the other. The only party that seems to be doing better in its entirety is the Democratic Party. And I also think that is noteworthy. Because Democrats are the incumbent party, you can expect energy and enthusiasm on the incumbent party side to be decreased. But it simply is not, largely in part to the fact that Joe Biden is a popular president. If you look at the amount of people that approve of President Biden, you're talking about a 13-point net approval amongst the American public. You're talking about 53% of voters saying, I approve of Biden, and 40% saying they don't. 13% is not nearly, the same amount as what was in the 2020 presidential election results. If you're looking at the popular vote, it was significantly reduced down to just 4.5% relative to 13%. So that means there are voters who voted for President Trump or voted for a third-party candidate that are now saying they approve of Joe Biden. And he's actually been holding steady. If you look at the approval rating polls, which unfortunately I do not have in front of me, but I implore you to go to FiveThirtyEight.com and check them out yourself, you will see that it has lasted since the beginning of the presidency. I mean, we're nearly a half a year in now, and we're talking about someone who has been in this honeymoon period for such a significant period of time. This can change, as it did with Obama, as it did with Bush, as it did with Clinton, but we still have to wait for that to actually happen. And so far, it's about even. 53% in the positive, 40% in the negative. The only time we've seen it get close is when Biden was up 11 points, and even then, it was only noteworthy because plus 11 is lower than plus 13, but there hasn't really been much fluctuation. As, American politics sometimes is, it's very boring at this point in time. Democrats have a trifecta. They control the presidency, they control the Senate, they control the House. So they technically have free reign in what they want to pass, but they are in very many ways being throttled by Senate Democrats. But that's just part of the problem. Also, the filibuster of the Republican Party is the main problem for Democrats in the United States Senate. All in all, not many major things can be passed, but the COVID-19 relief bill, a number of executive orders, a number of statements being put out by President Biden, that's where a lot of his approval necessarily is coming from. In addition, you're also just looking at the Democrats passing things in the House, which end up dying in the United States Senate, but it's still some type of progress rather than not having any votes in the House, and then the Senate is already stopping you. So, looking at these fundraising numbers, this allows both parties to sort of go into the regions that they need to campaign and spend money in. If you're looking at the amount of money raised in March and in April, you'll see that the Democratic Party campaign raised $9 million in March. $9 million. I mean, they raised a total of $83 million across these committees here, not just the Democratic senatorial one or the Republican congressional committee. It's all six of them. The DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, then the NRSC, the NRCC, and then the NRC. So it's a little confusing. Very similar names for reasons, but essentially it's just National Republican Committee, National Democratic Committee, Democratic National Committee, Republican National Committee, that's the DNC, RNC, and then the congressional campaigns, which means both the House and the Senate. It's a little confusing. You do need to understand the difference between the two because they do allocate resources differently to different candidates. But if you're looking here, closely looking, $83 million raised in March. I do not know if the Democratic Party has sent out a statement about April fundraising. I knew that the GOP Senate campaign raised $7.2 million in April. This does not cover the amount of money, but I do think that, similar months, you're talking about a decreased importance in the election season. It's right after a president is inaugurated, so you're not going to see as much energy. You're not going to see hundreds of millions of dollars raised, but you are going to see a pretty significant amount. And $8 million can go a long way if it comes down to just a few competitive states or a few competitive districts. So let's take a look at the exact numbers and just compare them because you'll see there are some differences. So $9.3 million were raised if you're looking in the state in the month of March for the DSCC, $8.3 million for the Republican counterpart. Now, if the entire of the 2022 election cycle has been calculated, meaning the first 3 months of 2021, the NRSC has actually raised more money than the Democrats. Then if you're looking at the House committees, you'll see that Democrats raised $15.6 million in the month of March, and then the Republicans actually raised $19 million in the month of March. But in the entirety of the 2022 election cycle, again, the first 3 months, the Democrats have raised 1% more than the Republicans, $34.1 million to $33.8 million. So they're about even, but about even is good for the Democrats. And I'll tell you exactly why that's good. I think that we all think that 2022 is going to be this different type of year. We don't know if it's going to be a Republican wave year or a Democratic wave year, but it's going to be potentially one of those two. And the Republicans are starting out with the advantage in the House of Representatives. Just looking at this House map, there is no other way to try to justify that. The Republican Party has control in terms of the majority of states in redistricting. In addition, they also have a lot of control over how these districts, how these districts in some of these Democratic areas are going to be drawn. I mean, you're looking at states that were won by Joe Biden, not only Republican states. When I talk about the states that went to the GOP, maybe Texas makes sense. Georgia, iffy. North Carolina makes sense. Florida makes sense. They all voted for Donald Trump. Georgia, however, did not. But Republicans have control. If you're looking at a number of these states, Republicans have control over plenty of them that are either previously Democratic states or voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 election. So Democrats are already at a disadvantage. In addition, Democrats are in a position where they are trying to pass laws against gerrymandering, trying to go to the Supreme Court, and they are trying to lead by example by establishing independent commissions in extremely large states, most notably California, which has now opted in to an independent commission to draw their congressional districts. Now, this is not the only state to do it, but it is the largest. And if Democrats wanted entire free reign over these districts, they could gerrymander the state into oblivion. 100%. Republicans and Democrats always do that when they get into power. My home state of Maryland has 1 Republican and 7 Democrats, yet 33% of the vote consistently goes to the GOP. That's not 1/3, but that's because Democrats have a supermajority in the state Senate, the state legislature. They have a Republican governor who can't even veto anything. Looking at the maps being drawn, not only in Democratic states, but in Republican states, they take advantage of their majorities. It just so happens that the power is disproportionately with the GOP in this instance. So they have redistricting. In addition, midterm election years are almost always opposition wave years. If Democrats won the Senate, won the presidency, yet still lost a net 12 seats in the House of Representatives, what does this mean for 2022 when they might not have a top winning candidate? They may not have a Senate election, which Democrats are set to pick up 3 seats, flip 4 seats. I mean, looking at the circumstances of the 2020 election, the Democrats got the most votes they've ever received in the House of Representatives, yet still lost 12 seats, and were largely expected to pick up seats in the House of Representatives. So the money matters. The money will absolutely make a very large difference. 90 to 95% of candidates, depending on the year, that out-fundraise their opponents end up winning their elections, because money matters, especially in these close congressional districts. It matters a little bit less on the Senate level. But when both parties have about even, it sort of tells us that they're going to have the same amount of money to disperse to each individual swing state. Now, if you're looking at the number of swing districts in the 2020 House elections, this is not the same map, so maps will be drawn, new swing districts will be created, but I will say that if you're looking at this map, the toss-up districts of the 2020 election all went to the GOP. The Democrats won 0 toss-up districts. I kid you not. They won 0 toss-up districts. The Democrats didn't make any type of gains in a single Republican seat except for 1 in Georgia's 7th district. The 2 in North Carolina were gimmies because of forced redistricting by courts. Those were forced to be given towards the Democratic Party. But in the 7th congressional district, Carolyn Bourdeaux narrowly picked up this race against in an open seat against a Republican. But it was a very narrow election in a state that just has suddenly shifted towards the Democratic Party. The Senate will also be a situation where it will come down to the amount of swing states, the amount of states that are deemed to be competitive. For the Democratic Party side, let's go ahead and take a look here. You'll see that the Democrats have a few competitive states themselves. They have Georgia, they have Arizona, they have Nevada, they have New Hampshire. Those are probably the 4 that will be competitive. On the GOP side, they have Wisconsin, they have Pennsylvania, and they have North Carolina. We don't see any suddenly emerging swing states, but it is potentially possible that if Chuck Grassley retires in Iowa, maybe it's competitive. If, Ohio has Josh Mandel as the nominee, it could be competitive. If Val Demings proves to be a formidable opponent to Marco Rubio in Florida, that could be a competitive state. What we are looking at here is that the Democrats and Republicans seem to have around equal in terms of swing Senate seats, but not necessarily in the House of Representatives, which I think really just further exemplifies why the GOP has that advantage amongst the House of Representatives, but not so much in the United States Senate, because the Republicans are going to be trying to defend home territory and trying to play offensively. But the reality of the situations is Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are two states the Democrats won in the 2020 election. Georgia and Arizona are not. Nevada and New Hampshire are not. And North Carolina has a retiring incumbent, which means the factor of the incumbency is now removed out of the situation. All in all, the Senate map is better for Democrats than the House map is for Democrats. The Republicans have a better, footing in the House of Representatives than they do in the United States Senate. So fundraising numbers by each committee certainly matter, but the fact that they're about even, I think, is a benefit for the Democratic Party, considering 2022 is largely expected to be by the right wing as a red wave year. And if Democrats are able to combat and counteract these fundraising numbers and get a similar amount, that's good for them. Because if they are able to spend a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of which districts the Republicans are spending in, which states the Republicans are spending in, they might be able to counteract significant losses in the House of Representatives and possibly even expand in the United States Senate. All Democrats need to do is be on par or outperform Republicans in fundraising, and they will be at a good footing for 2022. Because if you're looking at fundraising numbers in the past, typically they are indicators of enthusiasm, voter enthusiasm in general. And if one committee, which previously did very well, for example, in the 2020 election, does not do well in 2022, that might give some early results for what might happen in November of that midterm election. And in this case, on November 8th, 2022. So keep an eye out for fundraising. Early numbers aren't the best indicators, but they certainly do provide some type of context to the type of election that 2022 will be. And right now, it's sort of confirming everything that we've seen, that the election is sort of at a middle ground right now, and it still needs to be shaped in one way or another. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.